Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'll be showing you how I made this mermaid's tail cake. Firstly, I started with the tail. I drew a template and used it as a very rough guide and used flour paste to make the tail, as this was going to be the hard element and I didn't want that to be sagging anywhere. So I basically just rolled out the edges of the tail quite thin and kept the middle of the tail, or the stem, whatever you want to call it, quite large, as that was where the stick was going to insert to hold it up. You can see here that I've cut off the actual fanny bits of the tail and then put the middle piece on just to give me a rough idea as to how big I need to make that centerpiece. So I give it a rough cut. None of this needs to be totally accurate, just rough is fine, and you'll see why later. And cut off the base of it and the top, and that's sort of your rough shape. And just sort of keep working on that until you're happy. To help the sugar paste stop sticking, I used Trex, which is like a vegetable fat, so I guess you can just get that equivalent wherever you are. I then wanted the tail to be quite dinged up and fanned out at the top, like you can get those fighting fish, and they always have those beautiful tails that sort of fan out a bit. And so I used a modelling tool and just pushed that out a bit to make it a little thinner and a little more wavy and crumpy, and it didn't matter if it split in places. I quite liked that. But you can go for whatever effect you like. And then I just scored some more marks just to give it a bit more interest and texture. And when that was complete, I then placed it on a book on some parchment, and then to give it a bit more movement and life, I put some kitchen roll underneath it and lifted it up in places so that when it dried like it was sort of swooshing through the water. I dried that for about 24 hours. When it was dried, which you can see here, I inserted the stick with a little bit of edible glue, and then I painted the top with a little bit of edible glue, and then sprinkled it with some edible glitter. And then I set that aside and started on the cake. Now this is a 6-inch vanilla cake which I've dyed purple, and I'm just placing buttercream in the middle, quite a thick layer, leveling it off, and then adding the next 6-inch layer, which is just a plain Victoria or vanilla, and then doing the same twice more with the same size. And then on the top I then added a 5-inch and then baked a little sort of terracotta flower pot and placed that on the top. That I then set aside for a little while, and then after that I began carving it into the tail shape. So just gently go ahead and carve your cake, and keep your scraps because you can eat them, and take off a little at a time because you can't really put it back, but you can take more off, so take your time with that. And this is sort of how it looked getting towards the end of it. And once you're happy with the shape, you can then give it a crumb coat. So I gave it a crumb coat of vanilla buttercream, and once that was done I placed that aside to set up for a little while. This buttercream in particular, that crusts up really well, so I didn't need to put the cake in the fridge. If you check on my channel you'll see the recipe on there. And then when that was done I gave it a final thicker coat of buttercream and then set that aside, but not before smoothing it out, and you'll see that bit next. This smoother is really good. It was really cheap, but you can use just a piece of flexible plastic which will do exactly the same job, or a piece of thick card, and just run it up the side of the buttercream, and it gives it a lovely smooth effect. It's really good for smoothing out fondant edges as well. Okay, so once that's done it's time to work on the scales. I decided to use purple and green. This green was called gooseberry, and it's a really nice colour, so I just done a small piece of that, and I used the back of a Wilton 1M tip and just punched out some scales. So keep on going until you've used up all your fondant. And I took some of those green ones and I painted them half with edible glue and then sprinkled on the remaining glitter from the actual tail, so that they would be scattered throughout the tail when I sort of do the final finish. And then set them to one side and do the same again with purple fondant. Of course you don't have to use green and purple, you can use whatever you want. These are just the colours I chose, but make sure you do plenty, because I did run out halfway through and had to sort of redo another batch, and that was annoying. Okay, so when they're all done, push the tail into the cake in its dowel, and as you can see, you'll see here that it doesn't quite push down, but all I done was I used a piece of fondant to wrap around the base of that. You can cut off the bottom of the stick, but that's not what I wanted to do, so I just used a bit of fondant. And then I just used water and began layering up the scales. Put it over the tail first so you can't see the actual join, and then randomly place them throughout the entire cake. And keep going, keep going. You can try and do it without the glitter if you wanted as well, and maybe paint them gold. That would be quite nice. But as I had the glitter in use already, I thought I'll use that up. Okay, I'm coming towards the bottom here, and I didn't want to just finish it just with scales. I thought I'd try and make a little splash of waves for the tail to be diving into, so I took a little bit more fondant and dyed that blue, and then I used a pizza cutter just to cut out some wiggly wave shapes. And then again I took my sort of hard sponge and modelling tool and frayed out the ends just to make it a little bit more splashy like. Sort of splay them out as much as you can, or dare, before it tears. And then with a little bit of water I just ran it around the base of the cake and placed that on, and then used a tool or the end of a paintbrush would be fine just to stick that straight on. And then I done a couple more layers of that just to give it a little bit more interest. And then when that was complete, I took some white edible dye and just painted the edges to make it look like the edge of a wave being splashed out. Doesn't have to be particularly neat. Waves aren't perfectly white all around the edges, so however it comes out is fine. And that's it. That's all you need to do, and that's your tail cake. I really hope you liked it. It's quite an easy cake to do, a little bit time consuming with all the scales, but well worth it, and I think it makes a really nice effect. So give it a go, and if you liked it, please subscribe and check out the rest of my recipes. Thank you.